Welcome to Strides to Solutions. I'm Esther Adams, and today we're exploring one of the most overlooked aspects of ADHD, something that affects every moment of your waking life, yet rarely gets discussed in mainstream conversations about attention and hyperactivity. We're talking about interoception, your ability to sense what's happening inside your own body, your heartbeat, your breathing, the tension in your muscles, the signals of hunger, thirst, or fatigue. For most people, this internal awareness operates like background software, quietly informing decisions and emotional responses. But for many with ADHD, this internal compass isn't working quite the same way. The research we're diving into today reveals something profound about the ADHD experience that goes far beyond distractibility or restlessness. It's about being disconnected from the very signals that should guide self regulation, emotional awareness, and physical well being. Imagine trying to navigate through life while your internal GPS is constantly glitching. That's what diminished interoceptive awareness can feel like for people with ADHD. Recent research using heartbeat detection tasks, where people try to count their own heartbeats without feeling their pulse, shows that individuals with ADHD consistently perform worse than neurotypical controls. This isn't about being less intelligent or capable, it's about having a nervous system that processes internal signals differently. When researchers measure interoceptive accuracy, they're essentially testing how well your conscious mind can tune in to what your body is telling you, and for many people with ADHD, there's static on that channel. Think about what this means in practical terms. If you can't accurately sense when you're getting tired, you might push yourself to exhaustion without realizing it. If you struggle to detect early hunger cues, you might find yourself suddenly ravenous and making poor food choices. If you can't feel tension building in your body, stress might accumulate until it explodes into overwhelm. This interoceptive difference helps explain why people with ADHD often struggle with self regulation in ways that go beyond attention and impulse control. It's not just that they're choosing to ignore their body's signals, they might not be receiving them clearly in the first place. The research shows a clear pattern. The more severe someone's ADHD symptoms, the lower their interoceptive accuracy tends to be. Higher levels of inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and emotional dysregulation all correlate with reduced ability to sense internal bodily states. This creates a cascading effect where poor internal awareness contributes to the very symptoms that define ADHD. Understanding why interoceptive awareness is diminished in ADHD requires looking at the brain regions responsible for processing internal signals. The insula, a brain region tucked deep within the cortex, plays a crucial role in translating bodily sensations into conscious awareness. This same region is part of networks that are often disrupted in ADHD. The insula connects to the anterior cingulate cortex and prefrontal areas, regions we know are affected in ADHD. When these connections aren't functioning optimally, the brain struggles to integrate internal bodily information with cognitive and emotional processes. It's like having a communication breakdown between your body's data center and your conscious decision making headquarters. This neural disruption might explain why people with ADHD often experience emotions more intensely, but have difficulty understanding where those emotions are coming from. Without clear interoceptive signals, it becomes harder to recognize the physical sensations that typically precede emotional responses: the racing heart before anxiety, the muscle tension before anger, the heavy feeling before sadness. The research suggests that impaired interoception in ADHD may contribute to difficulties in arousal regulation. Your body is constantly trying to maintain optimal levels of alertness and calm, but this process relies heavily on internal feedback. When that feedback is unclear, the system can become dysregulated, leading to the hyperactivity, restlessness, or conversely, the mental fog that many people with ADHD experience. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of ADHD that current research has barely begun to explore: hyperfocus. While we don't have direct studies examining the relationship between hyperfocus and interoceptive awareness, the theoretical connections are compelling and concerning. Hyperfocus represents the flip side of ADHD attention difficulties, the ability to become so absorbed in an activity that hours pass unnoticed. For many people with ADHD, this intense concentration can feel like a superpower. It's when they produce their best work, solve complex problems, or lose themselves in creative pursuits. But here's where the interoceptive connection becomes crucial. If someone already has diminished awareness of their internal signals, hyperfocus might further suppress this awareness. During these intense periods of concentration, people might ignore hunger, thirst, the need for movement, or fatigue. They might sit in the same position for hours, skip meals, forget to hydrate, or push through exhaustion without realizing it. This creates a double edged sword. Hyperfocus can indeed be a compensatory strength, allowing people with ADHD to accomplish remarkable things when they find activities that capture their interest. The intensity and depth of focus during these periods can produce work of exceptional quality. Many innovations, artistic creations, and scientific breakthroughs have emerged from minds that can hyperfocus. However, this same intensity, combined with poor interoceptive awareness, can become a pathway to burnout. When you can't sense your body's signals for rest, nutrition, or movement, repeated cycles of hyperfocus can lead to physical and emotional exhaustion. The person might feel productive and accomplished in the moment, but their body is accumulating stress and depletion. The research shows that people with ADHD already have heightened stress sensitivity and emotion dysregulation, both established risk factors for burnout. If hyperfocus leads to prolonged periods of intense engagement without adequate self care, it could amplify these existing vulnerabilities. The impact of diminished interoceptive awareness extends deeply into emotional functioning. Emotions aren't just mental experiences, they're profoundly physical. Each emotion has its own signature pattern of bodily changes, shifts in heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, temperature, and gut sensations. For people with typical interoceptive awareness, these physical changes serve as early warning systems and guides for emotional regulation. You might notice your heart racing and breathing becoming shallow, signaling that anxiety is building before it reaches overwhelming levels. This awareness provides an opportunity for intervention, deep breathing, movement, or removing yourself from a stressful situation. But when interoceptive awareness is diminished, these early signals might not register consciously. Emotions can seem to appear suddenly and intensely without the gradual buildup that would normally provide context and control opportunities. This can make emotional responses feel unpredictable and overwhelming, contributing to the emotional dysregulation that's so common in ADHD. The concept of rejection sensitive dysphoria, frequently discussed in ADHD communities, might partly relate to this interoceptive disconnect. When someone can't clearly sense the physical buildup of emotional responses, perceived rejection or criticism might trigger what feels like sudden, intense emotional pain. Without the buffer of physical awareness, the emotional impact hits with full force, unmodulated by the body's natural regulatory processes. This emotional unpredictability can create a cycle of anxiety and hypervigilance. If you can't trust your internal signals to give you adequate warning of emotional changes, you might become constantly alert to external threats or signs of rejection. This hypervigilance further taxes the nervous system and can worsen both ADHD symptoms and emotional regulation difficulties. Poor interoceptive awareness doesn't just affect individual functioning, it can significantly impact social relationships. Social interactions require a complex dance of reading both external social cues and internal responses. When you can't clearly sense your own reactions, it becomes much harder to navigate social situations effectively. Consider how social anxiety typically works. Most people can sense the physical signs of social discomfort: increased heart rate, sweating, muscle tension. and use this information to adjust their behavior or remove themselves from overwhelming situations. But if these internal signals aren't clear, someone might find themselves in social situations that become suddenly overwhelming without understanding why. Similarly, positive social connections often develop through awareness of internal resonance, the feeling of comfort, excitement, or connection that arises when interacting with certain people. If these subtle internal cues aren't accessible, it becomes harder to recognize compatible relationships or distinguish between social situations that are energizing versus draining. The research shows that many people with ADHD experience difficulties with social relationships, and impaired interoceptive awareness might be an underrecognized contributing factor. When you can't clearly sense your own responses to social situations, it's challenging to develop the social intuition that guides successful relationships. This can also affect boundary setting. Healthy boundaries often rely on internal awareness, sensing when something feels uncomfortable, overwhelming, or inappropriate. Without clear access to these internal signals, people might find themselves in situations that feel wrong but can't articulate why, or they might struggle to advocate for their needs because they're not fully aware of what those needs are. The impact of poor interoceptive awareness extends into physical health in ways that are often overlooked. Your body is constantly communicating about its needs for food, water, movement, rest, and environmental adjustments. When this communication system is impaired, the consequences can accumulate over time. Sleep regulation provides a clear example. Healthy sleep depends on awareness of subtle fatigue cues throughout the day and evening. People with good interoceptive awareness can sense when their energy is flagging and when their body is preparing for sleep. But when these signals are unclear, sleep patterns can become chaotic. Many people with ADHD report difficulties with sleep, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking feeling rested. While circadian rhythm disruptions play a role, impaired interoceptive awareness might also contribute. If you can't sense when you're actually tired versus when you're simply bored or understimulated, it becomes difficult to establish healthy sleep routines. Eating patterns can also be affected. Hunger and satiety signals are subtle interoceptive cues that guide healthy eating. When these signals aren't clear, people might find themselves forgetting to eat, eating past fullness, or struggling to identify what their body actually needs. This can contribute to both nutritional deficiencies and overeating, both of which can worsen ADHD symptoms. Exercise and movement needs present another challenge. Your body constantly signals when it needs movement, when muscles are tense, or when energy levels require physical activity for regulation. People with good interoceptive awareness often naturally incorporate movement into their day because they can sense these needs. But when these signals are unclear, the natural movement that helps regulate ADHD symptoms might not occur. The research on time blindness in ADHD, difficulty perceiving and managing time, might also connect to interoceptive awareness. Time perception isn't just cognitive, it's also deeply embodied. We sense the passage of time partly through internal rhythms and changes in our physical state. Consider how you normally sense that time is passing during a long task. You might notice changes in energy levels, slight shifts in posture, the gradual accumulation of mental fatigue, or subtle hunger pangs. These internal changes serve as time markers that help calibrate your sense of duration. If interoceptive awareness is diminished, these internal time markers might not register clearly. This could contribute to the time blindness that affects academic and occupational performance in ADHD. Without clear internal cues about the passage of time, it becomes much harder to estimate how long tasks will take, pace work appropriately, or recognize when breaks are needed. This might partly explain why people with ADHD often struggle with transitions and deadline management. If you can't sense the internal changes that normally signal the need to wrap up one activity and move to another, transitions become abrupt and jarring rather than smooth and anticipated. The academic and occupational impairments documented in ADHD research, lower grades, Missed deadlines, job instability might partly stem from this fundamental disconnect between internal awareness and external time demands. When your internal clock isn't providing reliable information, it becomes much harder to sync with the external world's expectations. The relationship between working memory deficits and interoceptive awareness in ADHD presents another layer of complexity. Working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information in conscious awareness, is consistently impaired in ADHD. But this cognitive system might also be responsible for maintaining awareness of internal bodily states. Think about what happens when you're trying to focus on a demanding task while your working memory system is already overloaded. In neurotypical individuals, important internal signals might still break through to conscious awareness, the need for a bathroom break, increasing hunger, or mounting fatigue. But when working memory is compromised, as it often is in ADHD, there might not be sufficient cognitive resources to process both external task demands and internal bodily signals. This creates a vicious cycle. High cognitive load makes it even harder to maintain interoceptive awareness, which means important self care needs might be ignored until they become urgent. The resulting physical discomfort or depletion then further taxes cognitive resources, making it even harder to focus on tasks. The research shows that people with ADHD become more distractible and make more errors as working memory load increases. If we consider internal bodily signals as a form of distraction that can compete with task focused attention, it becomes clear why people with ADHD might learn to suppress interoceptive awareness as a coping strategy. But this suppression comes at a cost. While it might temporarily improve task performance, it can lead to accumulating physical and emotional needs that eventually demand attention in more disruptive ways. Understanding ADHD through the lens of interoceptive awareness opens new possibilities for intervention and support. Rather than focusing solely on external behavior management or cognitive strategies, there might be significant value in helping people with ADHD develop stronger connections to their internal experience. Body-based interventions like mindfulness meditation, yoga, or somatic therapies might be particularly beneficial for people with ADHD, not just for stress reduction, but for developing interoceptive awareness. These approaches specifically train attention to internal bodily sensations and could help strengthen the neural pathways involved in interoceptive processing. Regular physical exercise, already known to benefit ADHD symptoms, might work partly through its effects on interoceptive awareness. Exercise increases attention to bodily sensations and can help people develop clearer connections between internal states and external activities. Environmental modifications might also need to consider interoceptive challenges. If someone has difficulty sensing fatigue, they might need external cues to remind them to take breaks. If hunger signals are unclear, structured meal times become more important. If emotional buildup isn't detectable, regular emotional check ins might be necessary. The research we've explored today reveals that ADHD involves much more than attention and hyperactivity. It includes a fundamental difference in how internal bodily signals are processed and integrated into conscious awareness. This interoceptive dimension affects everything from emotional regulation to physical health, from social relationships to academic performance. While the research on interoceptive awareness in ADHD is still developing, and studies on hyperfocus and burnout are notably lacking, the theoretical connections are compelling. Understanding these connections opens new pathways for both research and intervention. For individuals with ADHD, recognizing interoceptive challenges can be validating and empowering. It explains why self regulation feels so difficult and why certain strategies that work for others might not be effective. It also suggests that developing internal awareness might be as important as managing external behavior. For families, educators, and clinicians, this perspective emphasizes the importance of supporting internal awareness alongside external management. Rather than simply trying to control ADHD behaviors, we might need to help people develop stronger connections to their internal experience. The goal isn't to eliminate the neurological differences that characterize ADHD, but to help people work with their nervous systems more effectively. This might involve developing compensatory strategies for interoceptive challenges, creating environmental supports that account for these differences, and building awareness that can guide healthier self regulation. Most importantly, understanding the interoceptive dimension of ADHD helps us recognize that struggles with self regulation aren't moral failings or character weaknesses. They're the natural result of having a nervous system that processes internal information differently. With this understanding comes the possibility of developing more effective, compassionate approaches to support and intervention. Understanding your internal world is just as important as managing your external behavior. And for people with ADHD, developing this understanding might be one of the most powerful tools for creating a life of greater ease, self compassion, and authentic well being. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the hidden sense that shapes so much of the ADHD experience. Until next time, this is Esther Adams, reminding you that every aspect of your neurology deserves understanding, acceptance, and skillful support.